Today we are going to talk about HTML forms. As you know, the forms are actually used all over the web to accept information and provide interactivity. Some of the basic types of forms, if you're familiar with, are, let me show you. So if you go to, suppose simply this one, google.com, right? So this is the example of the simplest example of forms. So basically, this provides interactivity for us, the users, and also this accepts information, right? Okay. Also, we also use order forms when we check out from Amazon or any other e-commerce website, newsletter sign-up form, any kind of sign-up form, survey forms, right? Add to cart form, and so on. So basically, how these forms are created. So if you look at google.com, how this form is created, or any other kind of form. So behind these forms are actually an HTML element, which is called the form element. So what the form element does is it contains and organizes form controls, such as text boxes, checkboxes, buttons, that can accept information from the website visitors. So if you look at this one, beneath these are, so this whole thing is a form. So probably this whole thing is contained in an HTML form element, where inside it we have form control elements. So this one, this text box is a form control element. This drop down is another form control element. These buttons are also form control elements. So the form element encapsulates all these form control elements that can accept information from the website visitors. So to understand the HTML forms, we need to understand about two very separate components. First one is the HTML form, and the second one is the server-side processing. Okay, so we'll talk about the very brief overviews of both of these, but for the server-side processing, the details are in the server-side course. So very simply, to give you the overview, if you go to google.com or anything, suppose bing.com, right? So this is, you see a form here, and you see this, then you search something, suppose you say Liverpool versus Arsenal, right? So basically, you are seeing an interface, right? And then once you type something, basically this form interface is accepting some data from you. And then once you click on this search, what's going to happen is whatever you are searching here, this text, right? This text is being sent to somewhere. Where are you sending it? Actually, you are sending it to Microsoft's server, right? Bing server. And Bing server is able to uh, read and execute based on this search query, and then it will send you some results, right? So that part, that means reading and evaluating this query and sending the result, that part lies in the server side processing. So server does some processing for you, okay, and sends you the result, right? So you click on this, immediately the server side processing starts. So the server side processing is done and it sends you some results. So you see the results here, okay? So what we saw in the first place here was the HTML form, right, itself. And then what we saw in the result is the result of the server-side processing. So it's very simply, the HTML form is a web page with the user interface, and the server-side processing works with the form data that we actually had typed. It can then, based on that, it can either send emails, write to text files, update the database, or perform some kind of other processing on the server and then show you the results. Okay. So these are the two components of using forms, right? But for this part of the course, which is the client side, we will actually focus on just the form interface or user interface. We won't go deep into what's going on in the server. Okay. So let's learn about the form element itself. So the form element, HTML form element, it contains the form elements on a web page and is the container tag. The container tag means all other form control elements are actually encapsulated in the form element. Then let's talk about different. So this is the form element, and this form element actually contains all these form control elements. Okay, all these form control elements. So some of the form control elements are input. So as the name suggests, it configures a variety of form elements, including text boxes, radio buttons. So all the fields where you can input some data or send some, like you can put some data in, are input elements. Text area, it is also a kind of input element, but it's a little bit different because it configures a scrolling text box. It's bigger than text box and it has scrolls, and it is also a container tag. Select is also a container tag. You will learn why these are container tags, but all these three, input, text area, select, option, all these are form control elements. Text select is for drop downs. Options are these are actually the options inside the drop down. So we will actually see examples for all of those. Those things will be more clear to you. So let's start with a sample form HTML, which will show you the form element. Let me show you one example. I think that's a better way for you to understand. So opening with Google Chrome. Okay, so this is an example of a form. If I go to the code beneath it, you see inside the body we have this form element, right? This is the whole form element. And this one has three form control elements. So one is input, second form control element, and the third form control element. Okay. Yep. So starting with form tag and ending with closing form tag, and inside that you have three form control elements. Okay. Okay. Next. So the attributes of the form element. Several attributes we'll talk about. One is the action, and then method, name, and ID. Well, action, this one specifies the server-side program or script that will process your form data. Okay, let me show you. So once you say sign me up, right? You put an email and then you say sign me up. What's going to happen? So basically this is some sign up form, right? So you put in your email, and then once you click on sign me up, some kind of script, you are basically, this data is going to be sent to some server, right? And some kind of script is going to be executed there, which actually can do like sign you up. Signing you up means they will put your email in their database, whatever, right? And then next time when you log on, they can pull in from the database and say, okay, you have already signed up. So that's kind of thing. But in any case, there is some kind of a script running on the server side. So the action attribute, what this action attribute does is, as a value of this action attribute, you put the name of that script. That, okay, once I click on submit, whatever is in this action, so if suppose the action attribute has a value, just for say it has a value of some process.php. Suppose this action attribute has this value. What's going to happen once you click on submit, it will go to the server and process.php, that file is going to be executed. That is that action attribute. Okay. Okay, next method. It's not very important to understand the in depth of it, but the method attribute actually this determines that how you are going to send this data to the server from your form. Either you use the get method or you use the post method. Once you will be studying the server side, you will taking the server side course, you will know more about this get and post method. Next two are simple. Name, it identifies the form. Name and ID, both of these are like the identifier for the form element or identifier for the form. Okay, next. So if we go to this example, you see here that the form, this one doesn't have any, like didn't use any attribute. I can add attribute, just give it an ID equals to test or something, anything, or newsletter. Any case, okay. Next, let's talk about the form control elements. Okay, so the first and first form control element that we are going to talk about is the input element. And as the name suggests, this input element accepts text information. Okay, so there might be different kind of input elements, and that kind is being determined by the type. So if you say type is text, then it's a text box. Okay, then if you say like type is submit, then it's a submit button. Okay, so okay, so let's look at this one on the same example that we're seeing. So here you see that inside this form element, right, we have three of these input elements, and what they are depending on the value of this type attribute. So if you say text, this is a text field. Okay, and then if you say submit, then it becomes a button. If you say reset, this input also becomes button. So all these are input elements because you are inputting something here, right? Either you put some text here as input, or you are just giving some input. Input means sign me up. This is also an input, right? Or reset it. This is also an user input, a command, right? Some user is giving an input or a command to reset this. Now the difference between this text and this submit input element is once you click on submit, what happens is, okay, what happened? Once you click on submit, when clicked, it triggers the action method on the form and sends the form data to the web browser. Reset, this one, if you click on reset, then it resets the form fields to its initial values. Then there are other kind of input types in form control types. So if your type is password, then it will actually mask your password. That means if you type something in a input text box that has a type of password, in that case it won't be shown. You will just see the stars. You are familiar with this, right? Then your input can be check boxes. So this is one example of that. So allows the users to select one or more of a group of predetermined items. Okay, let me show you some other examples. I hope, so suppose let's look at this one. Okay. Okay. So here you see this is the form element. Inside that we have, or I think I should get even a better example, maybe this one. Okay, so this is the form element. Inside that you see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6. So there are like 6 form control elements. 5 of them are text boxes of type text, and then we have one text area. The difference between a text box and the text area is in the text area you can determine the number of rows and columns, which is like this is configurable in a text area, whereas in an input element, input form control element, like which has a type of text, that means this is a text box. Inside that you cannot configure the length or width. Okay, so that's the difference between a text area and a text box. Okay, and let's add some more here. So if I go to here, so radio button, let me show you examples for radio buttons. Okay, let me just create them. I think that would be easier. Let's create a checkbox here. So say input type equals to checkbox. It's a Chrome, or let's put like different countries. So we are just creating some checkboxes. Okay, you see it here. So checkbox from control allows the users to select one or more group of predetermined items, right? Then let's create some radio buttons. Or let's change this to, so if you are actually having a checkbox, you can select multiple of them, right? But if you have like change them to radio button, so the type would be radio. In that case, you can just select one of them. Oh, okay, so I haven't grouped them together. So if you group them together, then okay, so how to group them together? So you have to put them in the same name, add attribute. So name attribute, name equals to, say, country. So this is a group of, I want to create one group out of these three radio buttons, right? So basically these groups should have the same name. Oh, sorry, attribute is name. Okay, now these three actually have formed the same group, and you can just select one of them. That is what radio button is for, right? Okay, so you see it allows users to select exactly one from a group of predetermined items. Each radio button in a group is given the same name and a unique value. Okay, uh, so the name would be the same, but the value would be different. Let's put a value of PD. Their values would be different. This is another attribute. Okay. Yep. Next. Then there is another type of input form control, which is hidden. As the name suggests, if you put a hidden form control element, what happens is you won't see it. It can be accessed both in client-side and server-side scripting, but sometimes this is useful, sometimes used to contain information needed as the visitor moves from page to page. That means sometimes you want to put some information in your form, which is somehow useful, but useful in different sense. Suppose you want to do some kind of calculation in your form, and then you want to save some constant value or metric or anything, but that thing is not like related anything to from user input, or the user doesn't need to know that. So in that case, you can just create a input form control element with type hidden, and then put the value there, and that's not going to be shown to anyone, but you can use that value for other purposes. That's the hidden thing. Next is the select element. This is another form control element, and as the name suggests, this one will create a drop down. Okay, this is also known as select box, drop down list, drop down box. It allows the users to select one or more items from a list of predetermined choices. So inside the select, you will have different options, right? So that is what the options are. Option is. So let me show you. Let's see if we have an example of options. So I think this one. Okay, so Control Shift I is the form element. Inside that, okay, so instead of select, they use this data list, or I could just find another with select. Select. Okay, let's change it to select. Okay, so now you see we have a or instead of that, let me do this thing. Let me just add a select element here. Okay, so I'm creating a select, and then inside that I want to add different options. So select has different attributes. Name, you can put a name for it. ID, a size. So size means how many values you want to show at a time. And multiple means it configures a select list to accept for more than one choice. Okay, so let's do this. So let's say we say select size equals to 2. Okay. Now I have created a select. You see it here. Okay, let me put a new line. It's easier. Okay, so I have created select. You see it here. Let me put like another new line. Okay, so I have created something here, but the only thing is there is no option added here. inside. So let's add some options. So it configures the options in a select list. Okay. Now let's add those options. Okay, so inside this, I can add option. Let's add, keep on adding this. So I'm adding multiple options. So for each of these, I'm going to have some text. So say, what kind of options can I add? So say student. Basically, I'm adding options for your profession or something, doctor, engineer. I have added 3 options. Okay, now you see I have a drop down with 3 options, and I'm seeing 2. The reason is I have put the size as 2, but I can add like 1. Then it will just show me 1. Okay, and then if I want one of them to be selected by default, then what I can do is I can add an attribute to the option thing. So it says selected. Okay, so it will make sure that out of all of your options, one of them is by default selected. So if you don't have this one, the first element will be shown here. None of them is actually going to be selected by default. Okay, so now you see that we can create drop down form control element using the select element and the option element. Okay, next. Okay, let's talk about input image button. So input image button. So this is also an input form control element. And the type is image. So what it does is basically it takes an image and then changes to a button. That means if you click on the button, click on the image, it just works as a button. And okay, and also it triggers the action method, sends the form data, similar to submit. It's just similar to submit. The only difference is instead of a button, you are actually you can use some image and convert it to a button. Or explicitly you can have, instead of input element, you can explicitly have button element and put type as submit, reset, or button. Okay. So when clicked, its function depends on the value of the type attribute. So if you create a button element, if you click on it, whether it will submit the data or reset the data will depend on the value of the type. Okay, next we'll talk about the accessibility and forms. It's very important to make the forms accessible. The reason is uh, for someone visually impaired person, he who is not able to see the form himself. In that case, he to understand or use a form, he needs to understand which field represents what. So for that kind of purpose, you should use these accessibility form control elements. Uh, in that case, if he is using some kind of software or a accessibility software that reads the form for him, it will be easier for him to understand what is doing what. It's not only just for, or this is not just for the visually impaired person or someone. This is also helpful for anyone. So let me show you one example here. I think that will make things more clear. So you see a form here, right? So it has a contact form, first name, last name, email, comment, etc. So if I go inside it, not this one, let's look at another one. Control Shift I. So this is a form element. Inside that you see we have different form control elements. Now let's look at this one. It's similar. The only difference is now there is a specific label for each of these elements. So the first form control element is inside one label element. Next one is inside. So basically you are creating a label for each of these text boxes. Next label is email, right? Okay. So let's go here. Then there is field set, legend. Okay, so let's look at this one. Okay, now you see even more accessibility elements added. So you see here that the first three fields are actually encapsulated in a container element, which is the field set, right? These field sets, so basically using the field set, you are creating a group. And for that group, you can use a legend, which is kind of caption. So you are, how this is helpful in accessibility is, suppose if you look at this one and this one, now you can directly see the difference. Once you look at this one, you already know that this portion is about the customer information, and then this is separate, right? Okay, so you create a field set, you then create a legend, which is a kind of caption for the group, and then you create three labels, and for each of these labels you create like, so each of these input control elements or text boxes now have a label, and they're grouped together, and then the group is named here. Okay, so they're grouped together using field set, and this field set has a caption in here. Okay, so that goes, oh, so now this is helping to like understand the form more easily and making it more accessible. Not only that, if you are using an assistive software, now it will be helpful in the sense that suppose you can't see the form, but now the software will be able to tell you that I need all these customer information, and the customer informations that are needed here are the first name, last name, and email. And for the assistive software, it would be easier because all these are now grouped together using field set, legend, label, right? Okay. Next, let's look at the other two, tab index and access key. Well, these are very important in the sense that, okay, let's do it here. Let's close this. So you know about the tabs, right? So sometimes we use tabs to jump from one text box to another. So you can see, but what I'm doing now is I'm actually pressing the tab on my keyboard. So pressing again, right? You see the controls are changing, right? So yeah, okay. You see, so okay, so here, so there is a default order based on how it's coded. So what you can do is you can actually change this. Sometimes what happens is you add the form control elements, a lot of them, like hundreds, but probably it's not true that all of them should be in the same order. So you can actually change the tab index. So suppose I say tab index equals to, let's make it 1, but then for this one equals to 2. So basically what I'm doing is I'm changing the order. So after this, by default it was this, right? The default order was this, and this, and this, and then here and here. But now I have changed the order. So let's see what happens. I am click on the tab. That's fine. Next one I change. This one was 1. That was fine. But next one I changed this one to 2. Okay, so 1, 2. Do you see? I changed the order, and after 2 I haven't mentioned anything. Now they should be again in the default order. So this and then this, right? This and then this. I can change the tab using the tab index. If I have like a lot of these form control elements being added and then I want to make an tab order for them, then I can just use the tab index and put values there to create the order, right? Because while we are actually navigating through the forms, we actually use this tab regularly, especially if it's a very long form. Another attribute is access key. So access key is actually, you are familiar with this. This is the hotkey. So let's add a hotkey. Okay, let's add a new attribute. Access key equals to, and access key value has to be just one character. So let's put it E. Okay. So what it means is if I click Alter plus E, then it should directly select this. Okay. So let's see if it works. So nothing is selected here. I'm clicking Alter plus E. Okay, so the one problem with the access key is sometimes it collides with the, we have shortcut keys, right? And hotkeys for different things. So it collided with an existing shortcut key, so it didn't work. Yeah, so you have to find a hotkey or access key that is unique. Instead of E, let's make it K. Now let's see. Alter plus K. You see, I did pressed Alter and K together and it directly went here. So you can add access key, tab index, and all those are actually for accessibility purpose, because that makes the form more accessible to you, right? Or more accessible to the user. You can create a form, create some hotkeys, mention them at the beginning of the form, and people can just click on those keys and directly go to that form element and put their information. Okay, next. Already we talked about label element, right? The label element associates the text label with a form control. So you create a label element, and inside that you put an input element. Or you can actually, if you don't want to nest them, you can put them separate, a label and then a form control element. And now what you do is you want to create some kind of connection between them, right? So that the accessibility software or something it can recognize. In that case, you put an ID for the input element. So you see this one, this input control form control element has an ID. And when you are actually creating the label element, you are using this for attribute, and as the value you mention this ID. So now there's a connection between this text box and this label. Okay, so there are two ways. One is you can nest the text box inside the label element, or you can create them separately and then make a connection using this ID attribute for the text box and for attribute for the label. Okay. Field set and legend, I showed you the examples. Field set is a container tag, creates a visual group of form elements on a web page. Legend is also a container tag, and it creates a text label within the field set. So it works like a caption, right? So this is the field set, and this is the legend. Tab index, I just showed you the example. Access key, I showed you the example. Okay. Next, using CSS to style the form. Okay, so this is again, since you already are familiar with CSS, this is not something very complicated. So let's see. So here you see, okay, Control Shift I. So it's the same form, just here some CSS is being used. So you see we are using embedded CSS using this style element. That one has rules for form, for the whole form, for label, for input element for the text area, right? And then there is also an ID selector, my submit. Okay. And so if you go inside the form, this form actually directly gets this style from, sorry. So this form actually gets its style directly from here, right? The labels got to get its style, and you see the last one. This one uses the ID attribute, and there it says my submit. So this one, this button, gets its style from here. Okay. Yep. So using CSS is straightforward, nothing different, just works as it works for other HTML elements. Okay. Next. Okay, so we briefly, at the beginning of the lecture, we briefly talked about the server-side processing. So let's very briefly talk about how this works. That is the second element of the form. So your web browser requests web pages and their related files from a web server. The web server locates the file and sends them to your web browser. The web browser then renders and returns files and displays the requested pages for you to use. Okay. So CGI, or Common Gateway Interface, this is the protocol for a web server to pass a web page based on user's request to an application program and accept information and send to the user. So the communication between the server and client is done using this protocol. For server-side scripting, there are many technologies. One of many technologies in which a server-side script is embedded within a web page document saved with a file extension such as .php, .asp. So it uses direct execution. The script is run either by the web browser itself or by an extension module of the web browser. I am going to actually show you one example. Steps in server-side in utilizing server-side processing. Okay, let's look at these steps. Your web page that you see, like suppose this is your web page. Okay, so this one invokes server-side processing by a form or a hyperlink. Web server executes the server-side script. Server-side script accesses requested database, file, or process. Web server returns the web page with the requested information. So very simply said, as I showed you at the beginning, right? Suppose bing.com. This is your website, right? So you put something here, you click on this, all this data goes to the server. Inside the server, you have a script, any kind of script. It might be PHP, ASP, JSP. That gets executed, that pulls some data from some kind of database or something, and then returns to you. Okay, so that are the steps. Very simple. So the common uses of server-side scripting is searching in database, place an order at online store, send web page to a friend, subscribe to newsletter. Okay. Now, let me show you one example. Is this going to work? Okay, let's see. Not this one. Yeah, so this one. Very carefully look at this. This one has some functionality. I'm not sure if that is going to work or not. Okay, so you see a form here, right? Anyways, you see form control elements here. And the most important one, this one. This has a type of submit. And as we said, if we click on a button that is of type submit, what happens? It goes and checks, okay, is there any action attribute value here? If that is the case, it takes the value, sends all your data to this server. So the address for the server is webdevbasics.net. Okay, so once you click the submit, all this data that you put here will be sent to webdevbasics.net. And then you are telling the server that inside your server, inside the scripts folder, there is a file called named demo.php. Execute that. Okay, so that is what you are requesting to the server, and you are sending all your data using a method. What is that method? Post method. Okay, so next, once you click on submit, what's going to happen? All this data is going to be sent here to webdevbasics.net, and inside that there is a folder called script inside the server, and there is a file demo.php. Demo.php has something. It can process all these data, and then it will process something. Let's see what it processes. So let's say Mehrab. Comment is, I am requesting, I'm sending a request. Let me know what demo.php does. Okay, let's see if it works. If this file is already there, okay, submit. You see your information has been received, right? And another thing, just look at this one, demo.php. So do you see this? My thing was like, this was the address of my HTML file inside my client, right? But once I clicked on submit, immediately what happened is this one got executed, right? this one got executed, and now you see that file, right? So that one got executed, and it actually sent me back this information. Your information has been received. I think they changed this demo.php at some point. Otherwise, it should have been like, it should have shown me all these as well. But they changed the code for demo.php. Now I can only see this line being returned. But in any case, now we at least know of, have seen one example where we can invoke server-side processing, right? We can invoke executing a script in the server by clicking here on the client. So a demo.php, this one has been executed in this server, and then the information has been returned back to my browser. So there are sources. Many web host providers offer free script for their clients. So here are some of the example of the sites that will give you free scripts to run. Let's see what this is. Okay, probably we don't have much time to explore, but you yourself can explore. Okay, so then in HTML5, there were some additional input types. One is email, right? These were added because nowadays we actually take email input a lot, and you see that you already are familiar with this probably, because sometimes you fill out forms that asks for email, and then if you don't put a valid email or valid email format, it will tell you that, okay, put a valid email. The reason is the type for that text box is email, and that can check if that is a valid email format. Otherwise it will just show you an error. You see, just like this, if this is an email field and you put something which is not an email, it will immediately show you the result. Okay, next, again, if the type is URL, then if you don't put a valid URL, it will just show you, prompt you error message. Number, if the type is tel, you just accept text information in telephone number format. Okay, so these are like for validation purposes. Then it can be search. Data list control, this is similar to select. Slider control. So basically, these are like easier ones. So instead of just, suppose this same thing could be done using a drop down, right? That's difficult. The reason is you have to have like 100 options, and then you have to go like select one value. Instead of that, you can just put a slider. The only thing you have to do is, as the type, you have to put range, right? And you have to put a minimum value and maximum value. Now it's easier, right? Probably easier to select 71. You don't have to go to all the 100. You just slide it and find 71 and select it. Spinner control. So spinner is, it's a like a rounded. So suppose the min value is 1 and the max value is 10, right? So by clicking on these two arrows, you can go to up to 10, and then from there it goes to 1. You can create calendar by using the type of date, right? Okay. So, okay, so those are the things. Let me show you the one last example. Okay, so let me show you. Suppose, let me show you this spinner thing, right? Okay, so you see, I can just click on these ones to go between 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 to 10, right? Let me show you the date. So this one is just an input form control, and then the type is date, and this one brings out a calendar for you. This is one thing that you see like in many places, booking airline ticket, right? Okay. Okay, so that's all. We talked a lot about different form control elements, how they work, and also we talked briefly about how your client-side website or your client-side form interacts with your server, right? Using the action attribute. So that's all for today, and thanks